Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fishing with Steve podcast. I'm here on the banks of Glenvale, which is Northern Ireland Carp Angling Society water, to meet a man who has pioneered carp fishing in Ireland for the last 30 years. A little bit outspoken, sometimes controversial, but he definitely knows his stuff. He's a Nutrabaits team member and media producer, Mr. Gerry Heapes.
As you'd arrive at the morning, gate would open at 9 and all the carpers would have their gear. It was day only fishing, you couldn't night fish, and everyone was running. He took a Ryanair flight with 2 lemonade bottles taped with a purple liquid in them in his hand luggage, big battered gnarly old looking mirror. And that was my first big 20 out of the lot.
Listen, thanks for joining me here on the Fishing with Steve podcast.
No problems.
Yeah, and allow me to join you mid-session here on Glenvale. How are you getting on so far today?
I arrived last night to only one swim being left, which is kind of a makeshift swim 5 here, which is, it puts you in a poor position, you know, because it's like Margate Pier along here, as you've seen. There's lines going straight out all across the lake, and it means it does cut the fish off moving down. They come up against a wall of lines and they get very cagey and they go elsewhere. So getting the fish to come down here, it can be a bit more awkward. I live in hope. It's Glenvale. It's the tough water, mate. It's not easy. Anybody who says it is lying to you. It can produce lots of fish in a session, but they're rare, you know. Right. You can blank a lot on here, and I have done. I'm beginning to work out, you know, it's taken a while. You know, my mate Rob, who's fishing in the first swim, he was living over in England. He's only moved back the last 2 years, and I was fishing up here and I was going, I can't make head nor tail of this place, Rob. And he was, well, yeah, don't be silly about it. You know, it's a carp lake, you know, you can work it out. And Rob's a brilliant angler. Like, he's really, really good. And I was just really struggling. I can't work out why they're not feeding in the deeper water. I can't get them, you know, it's an odd topography on this lake. And it's very challenging. And he kept on going, you're making more out of it. So when he moved back here 2 years ago and started fishing here, for the first season on here, he blanked. Right. And he was like, you know, this guy he's always been a bit of my, I don't like to say mentor or fishing idols, but he's always someone who's been my guiding light. He's very technical minded. He's very good at what he does. And, I'm always listening if he says something, because he's always got a nugget of information that's worth listening to. And for him to struggle on here, I knew, thank God it's not me. Yeah. I'm not the noddy. But a lot of people come up here and they spend a season on here and won't have a fish. And other people will come up here and they do 9 fishing a night. It's just, the problem with being a tourist angler, tourist carp angler, and that's what I call myself. Rob lives down in Mullingar. It's a 2.5 hour drive. You've just taken, was it 3.5 hours to get here? I know traffic was bad because there's parades on and whatever, but you know, when you're traveling, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes from my door. I don't have the opportunity like the locals who live 10 minutes up the road. They can drop in, have a look, see where the fish are kind of moving around to. They can drop a little bit of bait in. They've got the mates who are already up here fishing, and they've got the local network, so they know what's producing, when they're beginning to start off on their hits, because they go in phases of it's dead and then wallop, you'll get this massive hit. If you're on it, you can do really well. So being a tourist carp angler is that you're traveling such a distance to get to the place. You don't have the luxury that the locals have. So it can make you struggle a lot more. You tend to be fishing kind of a bit on the back foot, you know. That's when it, you know, like, as I say, this would have been my last pick of swims. It's a good swim, but I'm cut off with somebody in 4 fishing over right on top of me. I've literally got a little corner in there.
Yeah, I see that, yeah.
And it's not much to go at, you know. But, you know, then again, who knows? It's fishing.
You live in hope.
No, you do. It's all you can do. Anyway, I'll let you crack on.
Oh, but take us back then, Gerry. So where did it all start for you? How did you start in the fishing?
Well, I moved to Ireland. I was born in London, and I was born to an Irish father or a Welsh mother, which makes me a complete mongrel, which makes me laugh, actually, because when I moved over here, I was always called a Brit. But when I lived in England, I was called Paddy. And I don't know why they went with Paddy and not like, you know, a Welsh taff or whatever that you want to call it. But I was always slagged and given a hard time for being Irish.
Yeah.
But when I moved here, I was then this Brit, and I thought, I can't win here, you know. I get slagged over there, get slagged over here. And, you know, I always thought that if I just rowed a little boat out in the middle of the Irish Sea, I'm home.
Yeah,
that's
right
me, I'm
middle,
done. Yeah.
Isle of Man somewhere.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle. But, you know, I had nobody in my family who fished except for my uncle. His name was Frank, and he was, you know, a mad fisherman. And when I was about 5 or 6, we used to go down to the River Thames on Runnymede, and we'd be fishing for anything. And he used to get really annoyed with me because I had the patience of a gnat. You know, I was just gone, wanted to climb a tree, and, you know, I was 5 or 6 years old. But, you know, something kind of took hold, and we started doing a lot more together, and he used to bring me, and then my dad would used to come out. My dad was a builder, and he worked really hard, and he just slept on the chair. He had no interest in fishing whatsoever. But myself and Frank, we used to fish a lot together, and we fished Frimley. That was one of our main places. Now, Frimley is very, very famous these days in the UK for producing very big commons. But back in the day, I don't know, I think there was something like 15 or 16 pits on the place. They got rid of half of them to build a motorway. The ones that we were fishing, unfortunately, were the ones that got removed. But we used to go for tench, and we would sort of go very early morning and go tench fishing and cat bag up on tench, and there'd all be sort of 4 or 5 pounders over there, and it was great fishing. And I saw this kid. Now, I was a youngster myself at the time, but I saw this kid fishing on the far side, and he managed to catch a couple of carp, and that really piqued my interest. I thought, they look bigger than what I'm catching. And rolling on then, you know, I started going on my own. My mates where I lived were all into fishing. So we had a lake, and I wouldn't say it was close to us. It was a bit of a trek. It was, you know, I lived in sort of South London, place called Croydon. And Norwood, which would be, I don't know, probably about a half an hour, 40-minute bus journey, you know. There was a lake there called South Norwood Lakes, and we used to go up. There was a park lake, and it was quite funny because you'd arrive at the morning, gate would open at 9, and all the carpers would have their gear. It was day only fishing, you couldn't night fish, and everyone was running for the best swims. Right. And there were a couple of swims that really, really just produced the fish. And it was a race to who was the fastest. And being young, I always got them. Yeah. Didn't catch many fish, but I caught, you know, I got there, you know, and that was my sort of, I was about 9 or 10 at that stage when I started fishing there. And I think at 9, I caught my first carp in South Norwood, and it was about, if memory serves, about 5 or 6 pounds. But it was a monster to me.
At that age, you're probably thinking that's a...
I mean, it was just, but I caught it by design, because the previous time I'd been there, I was fishing on the railroad bank, which was this long bank, and this guy who had been fishing with luncheon meat, big pieces of luncheon meat, and he caught a couple of 12-pound carp, which, like, they were huge. I've never seen anything so big. Yeah. And so the next week I went with a tin of luncheon meat, and I spent the whole day trying to work out how the hell do I keep it on, because every time I cast it was going off. Yeah. And, you know, I was using spaghetti, and there was no hair rigs. We weren't using hair rigs back then. Yeah. I know hair rigs had been out. Yeah. This would have been sort of probably 1980. No, sorry, 1970. Right. No, I was born in 1970, so it would be 1980 when this was happening.
So the birth of the hair rig was about 80, 81 when they started coming out over there.
Well, I mean, it was late 70s when they were playing around with it. But so yeah, it's like, when you think about 70s and 80s, it's so long ago now. Yeah. It's like a long time ago. But yeah, I mean, we weren't privy to any of that stuff. So we were fishing at a bolt rig style. It was actually like a backstop. We used little float ledger beads with a little plug. And so the lead could run maybe 5 or 6 inches in it. It would bolt them, you know. But we were actually fishing big size 6 hooks pulled through and turned around with a piece of spaghetti. And that, you know, it was a gentle lob. It wasn't a big cast. But I managed to catch my first fish. And that was me cemented as a carper. That's it. That's all I wanted to do. I remember buying, I actually still have it, the original copy. It's the first edition copy of Kevin Maddox's Carp Fever. And I also have Rod Hutchinson's Carp Strikes Back and his previous one. And I have all of them at home, and they're all like the first editions of them because I bought them when I was 13 or 14, as presents, birthday money and whatever. And I went in straight down. Used to go down to Gerry's and Wimbledon's and buy all my gear in there. And I used to spend hours in there just sniffing bottles of flavourings, and it was all Richworth and Jeff Kemp. Jeff Kemp was the big stuff back in the early 80s, and that stuff was just the best ever. I used to love the flavourings. Nutrabaits came around 1986. That's when it was established. And I'd just left. I came here to Ireland in 1986, October.
Would have been around
so
16?
I was about 16 and a half, 16. I was exactly 16 when I got here. And I remember, I'd built this amazing love affair with carp fishing. And I literally spent every day of my school summer holidays. Like, there wasn't a day missed. I was up South Norwood every morning, first thing, and leaving just as the park closed, and I was back on the bus back home. And it was just a great way to spend your youth, And then when I remember it clearly, we flew over in about, it was kind of like August time, because we were moving in October, and my old man was looking to find somewhere to live. Well, we had somewhere to live, but it was being built. So we needed somewhere to rent. So that's what his journey was. And I remember coming over with him on that trip. It was a weekend trip. And I was on the plane reading a course fishing magazine. And I only bought it because there was an article on fishing in Ireland in it.
Right.
And I had completely prepared myself that there were no carp.
Right.
And I was going to start as a bream angler and go big bream fishing. That was going to be my thing.
Carp, so under using carp tactics?
Yep,
yeah.
That was my thinking, because there was I can't remember who wrote the article, but it was a really interesting piece, and it was on Loch Naglac, I think in Carrickmacross, Loch Naglac. He was fishing, and these things were huge, like big bream, and he was catching big tench, and he was employing carpy tactics.
Yeah.
I thought, well, that'll do. That's as nearest of I'm going to get to it, and pike fishing. So. And I remember having this real horrible feeling about, I'm not going to enjoy this, because it's just not carp fishing, and it's not as involved, and I'm going to miss this. So then when I got here, I found out, well, actually, no, there are limited areas to fish for carp.
Yeah.
And obviously Mullingar was one of them. I managed to start whenever I could. I remember at my age, I was reliant on lifts. My old man was brilliant. He used to drop me up for a weekend and come back up and pick me up. It's back in those days, there were no motorways to Mullingar, so it was a...
So we're talking Garmoylestown, is it?
Yeah, Garmoylestown, yeah. So, and I started fishing there, and that's where I first met Rob, all those years ago. And Rob and I were both fresh-faced, and it's only, 70 yards across? None of us could cast to the far side. We were missing it by yards or 10 yards. And Rob was just coming up and flicking them out, and phew, off they went. And he was right within a foot of the bank, and we were like, how's he doing it, But I started, learning more and more over,
You were saying there, you were saying there, like, you were dropped off for a weekend as a kid. There wouldn't have been no bivvies and bed chairs and stuff like that, was it? Technically, it was.
Well,
so
was
that started
yes and no. I mean, look. It was back in the time when there were no ground sheets, not ground sheets, unhooking mats. There was an awful lot missing. So your bed chair was, I'll tell you what it was an old sun lounger, the ratchet jobs, silver ratchet, and you took off the mattress. And Kevin Nash had brought out this green sleeve that went over it. And it was really carpy. Jeez, it was awful to sleep on. And that's all you had. And you had a wavelock umbrella with a shroud. He also brought out a shroud that it was just this piece of sheet that you pegged down, and it had a kind of a door in it, And we're getting blitzed out by the helicopter. But it was, you made do. You didn't have luxury. And, Gardner had just brought out his very first rod pod. And I don't know whether you want to pause out there for a second. because he's buggering off now. Yeah, Gardner just brought out their first rod pod. We were fishing up tonics. We didn't have any, we didn't have any of these things, remote receivers. We had cables coming out of them. We had Les Bamford conversions. It was just the wonderful thing about carp fishing back in the late 70s and early 80s was it was pioneering shit. I mean, it was just, you were on your own. You didn't have, magazines were all the rage or becoming more popular. But it was just a mystery. You had to work out everything. And you didn't really have the luxury of going into a tackle shop and buying it. You had to kind of make it yourself at home.
MacGyver stuff.
It was a little bit, chewing gum, sticky tape, that kind of thing. But it worked. And more importantly, the fish had no names. It was the unknown. You didn't know what you were going for and were likely to catch. And it was a real adventure. It was great fun. So, I spent a good few years on Gamorstown and then searching out the Mullingar area. We had Ballina Fid. There were a couple of other smaller lakes that, carp had been. Look, back in those times, we talk about people robbing fish and moving fish around in a very dirty light, and rightly so. But back in those days, there were no carp in Ireland. There were literally two main lakes. There was Gamorstown and there was the Loch in Cork. And that was it. That we had two lakes, and then Ballinafid was kind of on the scene because a couple of local anglers had taken some of the babies. Because Gamorstown was one of those lakes that, rare, in Ireland, it actually propagated a stock. Every season it was flooded with baby carp. And so you could just keep taking the babies out and moving them around. And that's what happened. Anglers were literally fishing for a weekend, and while their rods were out, they'd have a float rod and they'd fill up a keep net and then empty into a bucket, and they'd go to a different lake and just pile it all into another lake. And then also you had fishery board members who were realizing that carp were advantageous and were starting to do a lot of work. He's back again.
Yeah, he knows we're filming, that's the problem.
Yeah. So these guys, there were one or two good guys in the fisheries board. And one thing I'm going to do in this conversation we're having, I'm not going to be naming names on an awful lot of people because I want to keep it as clean as I can. But there's a lot of history here, and there's a lot of bad blood. Across the board that anglers have had against the fisheries board or the Department of Marine or whatever it is. But I'm going to try and keep it as clean as I can because negativity only breeds negativity. So I'd rather be a little bit more positive about stuff. But if we're going to be truthful about the history, we're going to have to be truthful about the events. So that's what I'm sure we're here for. So anyway, we fished Mullingar quite a lot. And then, I was sort of into my, late teens, I was sort of 18, 19, and I started getting myself down to Cork. I'd seen a few pictures. I was in one of the fishing tackle shops in Dublin city centre, and there was a picture on the wall of this carp of about 23 pound held by Peter Walsh, who was a Mullingar angler and a very fine angler, a nice guy too. And he'd obviously gone down to the loch and caught this 23 pound, and I went, oh my God, they're here. We're catching 10 pounders in Gamorstown. I'm thinking we're the, dogs danglies, these are big fish. So I wanted to go and see what the loch was all about. So, my first trip down there was, I actually went down there with a girl I was going out with. I conned her into bringing me down. We stuffed a little motor full of my fishing gear and we camped out on the loch. And I managed to get 3 fish from my first weekend's fishing. I had a 13 pounder, I had a 19 and an 18.6. Remember those weights because they were my first loch fish. And I was just, wow, this is where it was at. But we were having to try and invent on the fly because the loch gave us a whole new set of problems that I hadn't associated with any, because it's a park lake, concrete path, a little wall, and you've got to put a pod on that. And then at the time, we were fishing for a very low stock because it was all original fish that had been in there from the early 50s. And they were big old girls, and the problem with that lake was that it was only 1.5 to 2 foot deep. and there were about 300 swans on it, and about 400 geese and seagulls and coots, moorhens, these Chinese mandarin ducks, whatever they were. I mean, it was carnage. You put a line out and they were wiping you out. So we had to try and, we were actually fishing our rod tips down on the actual silt bottom.
Right.
And we were fishing our butts like nearly at head height.
There's no backleads and all that. Just
we hadn't worked that out.
Yeah.
And it was painful. It was painful because people walking around the park were getting annoyed with you, you know, because your gear was in the way of their path. And I get it, but it was also a fishery. So we were trying to do our best to fish. Yeah. And, you know, the loch, as I said, it's right next to a road, it's next to pubs, and you're chucking out time, and at night it gets very rough. You know, it can go horribly wrong. There's been guys beaten up down there. They've had their gear robbed. I've had gear robbed on me down there. It's kind of scary fishing. You can't really sleep at night. Yeah, and after 2 days on the loch, 3 days, you're just like a zombie. You're just like, you know, it's tough going.
And what are you talking about, like the early 90s though, when you went down there? Was it kind of like what year was?
Oh, right. So it was 1988 when I started fishing the loch.
So you were coming from Dublin?
Yeah.
So you're probably talking 4.5 hours probably?
No.
Trip down?
No, about 5.5 hours back then.
The bad roads.
That helicopter's back.
I know, yeah. Looking for you, Gerry.
Yeah, he's trying to spot the carp. It was country roads. There was no, you know, when I got really sort of driving myself, well, I'm leapfrogging a bit now.
Yeah.
You know, it really was an endurance test to get down there. And we ended up leaving at sort of midnight and driving through the night to be there for dawn. And as I said, it was all back roads. There were no motorways. It just wasn't there. And but you know, as I said, I started to go down, and before I started driving, the first trip I was down there, I met up with a local guy called Ernie McGrath. Ernie became a really good friend, and Ernie was very passionate. He was a carp angler, about the same age as me, and he was just fixated with the fact that he'd found another person who had the same drive, passion and interest and gear that he had accumulated as well. And we became really good mates. And so what would actually happen is I used to get a lift into Dublin City Centre, and I used, with all my gear, down to the train station, jump on the train with all my carp gear, and he'd pick me up the other side because I wasn't driving. Right. And he would drop me off at the loch, and he'd go finish work and then come back and then fish with me for the weekend, and then drop me back to the train station, and I'd load on all my gear and
I say, if you had a good session and you had catching a few carp, the commuters were loving the smells coming out of your gear.
But you haven't showered and washed in 3 days, and it's, you know, it was kind of, yeah, I did feel for people on that train, but you know, we started to do quite well, and we, you know, evolved our fishing, and we started to work out backleads were a way forward. You know, you were adopting some of the tactics that the UK anglers were using, but you were doing them for very different reasons because of the topography and the location on the loch. Yeah. As I said, you know, a 20-pounder was your goal out of the loch, and a 20-pounder was not a rare fish, but there was probably only about 35 carp, 40 carp in the lake at the time left. And you know, you had local yahoos coming down with sea rods, big leads and trebles, and, you know, they were snagging them on the backs and trying to pull them up and take them away and whatever. Look, if you did a fish in a weekend, you'd had a good weekend. Right. If you did 2 to 3 fish in a weekend, that was a session of a lifetime. Right. That's how it was, tough as nails, and more often you blanked. And your blanking wasn't because you couldn't fish, well, you weren't a good angler. It was the environment of the lock. You had, the minute you put out a bait, 300 swans went like that and stuck their asses in the air. They didn't even have to go too much of a lift to get down to the bottom. You put any bait out at all. So all your baiting was done at night when they kind of went to sleep by the island. And so, as I said, it was a big learning curve and an adaptation. My best hit I ever had, and I held a record for that period of time when we had only originals in the lake, was I went down, got off the train, Ernie picked me up, dropped me to the lake, and he said, right, it was a Friday morning first thing, and he said, right, I'll be back tea time. And he left me on my own. I was fishing the swings part of the lock. If anybody knows the lock, they'll know where the swings are. And I was fishing out to the island, and I was playing around with a rig, which, believe it or not, was a precursor to the Ronnie rig. Well, this would have been 1989. And the spinner rig, or the Ronnie rig, is a 2010 invention. And what it was, I'm not saying I've taken credit for this. I looked at other people doing stuff in magazines and books, and I had attached a hook to a split ring and then had the trace coming off at the bottom of the split ring, and I tied the pop-up, which was home rolled, with floss onto the actual ring itself. So the hook was away and it was actually tied. So if that's the ring there, if I do that there, the hook was, you know where a split ring has its natural gap, you know, where you can actually put your thing on. I actually put the hook in there, and because it was so tight, the actual hook stood out proud on that thin piece. Gotcha. But it wouldn't move and it wouldn't flop over. So then what I do is I tie a bait on the ring itself. So the hook and the bait weren't together. They were separated. And they were close enough together if I tied it right, and then a little dab of super glue so it wouldn't move. And I was using this then with a bit of putty. It was a green putty. I don't know who made it. Could have been Garner at the time. It was one of the very first putties out. And so I actually had, for all intents and purposes, a Ronnie rig. And the fish had just spawned and were really hungry. And I was fishing the side of the island, and I was casting as close as I could get to it. And I had an old, well, it was brand new at the time, Cobra throwing stick, metal one. And, you know, just 2 minutes after, and your arm was just fleeced, wrecked. And I managed to catch 22 fish in a day. Oh. And no one ever beat that. It was the biggest, largest capture of carp on the lock ever, of the original fish. I had multiple runs. You know, I had playing with fish and there were other rods going, and I'm on my own. And I didn't have an unhooking mat or anything like that. And it was carnage. You know, it literally, Ernie came down at 5 o'clock in the evening, set up his oval umbrella. I was fishing under an oval umbrella. Then Nash had brought them out. And we just kept on catching right through the evening. And here's the thing, the kicker was, my largest fish was 19.6 £. I couldn't break the 20. I couldn't get a 20. I caught literally, probably half the stock of the lake. Well, it wasn't half the stock, but obviously, I don't know whether it was all males, and males tend to be not, you know, the big girls weren't playing ball. I don't know, but Ernie came in and joined in the action, and he had 5 in the night. Doing some fishing the same area and the same tactic, and using the same bait as that I was on. Can't even remember what the bait I was on, but it worked really, really well. And it was one of the better hits that I've ever had on the lock. And they were special because, as I said, all of them were originals, which meant something. So, you know, it was good fun.
And when did you find out or hear about decoy then?
Well, before I jumped to decoy, because then Ernie contacted me, we used to send each other's letters. There was no email back then, right?
You're showing your age, don't you?
No, I mean, it wasn't. The internet didn't come around until 95, 96. So it was one of those things of, you know, if I wanted to do any correspondence, I had to send a letter to him. And he said, I still have the letters at home in a little scrapbook. And he was in a tackle shop in Cork City, and he'd heard about another lake that was being run by a guy called Gerry Heapes as a trout fishery up in Ballincollig. And Ballincollig was this small little 3-acre reservoir, lovely little place. And Gerry had mentioned that there were carp in it. And Ernie pricked up his ears and he sent me, we weren't even ringing each other, just a letter arrived. Found a lake that may have carp, Chair. So next trip I went down. And at this stage I was now driving. So I drove down and I wasn't driving now. I was still, I don't know how I was getting down there. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But he'd found Ballincollig and he brought me out to it. And there were indeed carp in there. And it turns out that a fisheries board officer, I'm going to get this name wrong now, I think his name was Noel Hackett. He had stock carp in it from a cheese factory, had these ponds in the back in somewhere in Waterford. And they brought carp in to clear out the weed and it didn't work, so they wanted to get rid of them.
Right.
So he took them and put them into two places, Ballincollig and Watergrass Hill. Watergrass Hill's on the way into Cork, and Watergrass Hill was 2 lakes, and he put them in there. And funny enough, the carp that were put into Ballincollig were smaller growing, or slower growing, than the ones that were in Watergrass Hill. And Watergrass Hill looked like it was going to do some really big fish very quickly. So these fish that were in Ballincollig got up eventually up to low doubles, mid doubles. And I went down there and I started fishing Ballincollig then. And we went down on as much as I could get down there. And we were catching fish up to 15, 16, 17, 18 pound.
And do you know what strain of fish they were? Were they the same strain that came from Garmolestown?
No, they were a different strain. Look, unless you have somebody who can actually do some gene mapping, you're never going to know where any of our fish are from. All we have is hearsay rumour, but he told Noel Hackett, because I talked to him on a number of occasions, a really good guy. And to me, he was the pioneer of the fisheries board for carp. He was a really good guy. And, they had a number of areas to take carp from. There was Lochmore and Waterford. There was Garmolestown. There was a lake in Ranelagh, small pond. And these were all propagating ponds. And so they were taking all the fish and putting them all around the country in certain locations where they wanted to see how they were going to do. But Noel Hackett, he, as I said, stocked this place. And so anyway, we started fishing it and it became our love affair. It was just amazing. It turned out that a couple of other locals had taken some of the larger fish. The 18s and 19s we were catching were actually lockfish. They'd taken a couple of the bigger lockfish and put them in. And that's kind of what people were doing back then. I've already said earlier on. People nowadays, stealing fish and moving them around is wrong. Back in the day, if we didn't do it, it weren't getting done. So,
and you can see that sort of stuff was happening in the UK as well. And I listened to all different podcasts and stuff like that in the UK. And you said, there was a fish that was in, it might not be in Raisbury, but there's a fish that was in there. And that went from Lake 1 to Lake 2. And then that 40 ended up in the picture that was in the lake that was 10 miles down the road, so it was happening everywhere at that time.
And, what we did, myself and Ernie, we had an occasion to move a couple of small Ballincollig carp into the loch to help rejuvenate. As I said, it was just a thing we did in the times. Garmolestown, I remember us fishing on Garmolestown and moving the guts of nearly 1,000 carp over a couple of days into Ballinafid and never saw them again. Don't know where they went. And there was a little river that runs down into the big lake there. Is it Loch Owl? Yeah. And I know carp have been found in there. So whether they just went down there and didn't stay in Ballinafid, I don't know. But it's an odd one. So we fished Ballincollig a lot and the loch, and I managed to get my first original 20. It was 24 and a half, I think it was. I was writing at the time then for Irish Anglers Digest, and it made it to the front cover, and I did a whole piece on the actual capture of it. And that was one of my favourite fish. It was a big, battered, gnarly, old-looking mirror, and that was my first big 20 out of the loch. And I was a bridesmaid all the time down there. a mate of mine, Greg, who we fished together a lot down there, he'd come down, he'd look in my bivvy and go, I like that rig. Put it on. Oh, they're nice tigers. Can I have a few of them? On. Where should I put it? Out there. Rattles away 20 minutes saying he had a 25 common. And I'm still the bridesmaid. On my bait, my rig, you know, and I told him where to cast it. But, you know, look, he was a bloody good angler, so he didn't need my help. Yeah. But it was a bogey water in many ways for me to lock. In that I just couldn't get over the 20-pound mark. I just couldn't do it. And yet everyone else frequently would go down and catch. Rob, who's fishing here this weekend, and I've mentioned earlier, he held the Irish record of 27 pound for a good number of years until it was beaten. You know, Mark McGivern was down there at the time. Mark McGivern's a well-known name up here in the north because he was one of the originators of NICAS and getting carp into Northern Ireland. He did a lot of hard work and hard lifting. I'm not saying he did it the right way. Pissed a few people off. I have a soft spot for him. I can't find it in my heart to be harsh on him, but I think he still could have done it a better way. But look, that's history. I know you've mentioned decoy, and I know that's where you're itching to go, so we'll go there.
Not really itching to go. It was just as I didn't realise the Ballincollig thing. I know of Ballincollig, but it was never mentioned. Like as I said,
yeah, no, it became an iconic water, and anybody wanted to go and fish there and were fishing there, and it had great potential. But it was a runs water. You could catch 10 doubles up to 20 pound in a weekend. You know, like in a day, when it was on. You know, you actually...
And what sort of environment was it in? Was it like farmland? Was it a thing like that? I'm assuming it was totally opposite.
It was just off a road. There was a tennis court, and it was an odd location. It was an odd location. A little funny story. Derek Brooks is, again, for most younger carpers in this country, or new carpers, they won't know who he was, but Derek was the godfather of carping in Ireland. Not that he did anything, he just was everywhere. Yeah. He was the old boy, and he was just a legend. He was a really nice guy. And Derek Brooks, he just was a passionate carp angler. He was on Galmolestown. Anybody who fished Galmolestown in the 80s and early 90s, that's how he started everyone off in Ireland. But Derek Brooks was fishing Ballincollig one day on his own, and he was having a great time on his own, catching a few fish, and he was being quiet and he was sitting in his rods. And next of all, 3 young women came down and went skinny dipping because they thought nobody was there. And he's sitting in the bushes praying to God he's not seen and not been arrested after for whatever. But it was one of them places that was quite a memorable place. I've soft spots for a lot of places, and that's one of them. It's gone now. Got ottered out, got fished out. Let's bounce it on to decoy, because decoy was the linchpin of modern carping in this country, without shadow of a doubt. So, how
did you find out about it? How did you hear about it?
So Hugh Goff was a famous fisheries board officer who wrote a book, Coarse Fishing in Ireland, and in it he had a bit on carp fishing, and he was mentioning that he fishes a private estate somewhere down the Midlands of Ireland, and you know, there's big carp in it, like huge carp. So, being part, you know, in the group of the fisheries board, Paul Burke, who was my kind of guy that I liaised with, Paul was he was one of the good guys. He actually fished, and I was very friendly with him, and really nice fella up until he retired. But Paul gave me Hugh Goff's number and said, give Hugh a ring and maybe he'll put you onto the lake. So this particular night I rang Hugh, and I don't think I remember being so abused down the phone by this guy. Who do you think you are ringing me? Who gave you this number? It's like, well, Paul Burke did. Yeah. And he said, you know, you'll never get on the place. You wouldn't be allowed in it. Your type wouldn't be allowed in there. It's only for us, you know, special people. And he swore at me, and I was young enough, and he was swearing at me and giving out, and he hung up. And I rang Paul the next day and said, Paul, I don't know what happened there, but he was really nasty. And he said, well, he's after giving out to me for giving you his number. And he said, you were really abusive on the phone. I said, well, no, I wasn't. But, you know, what can you do? Now I knew it existed, so now I had to find it. Yeah. And as I said, I was writing for Irish Anglers Digest at the time, and I'd had whispers that it was down sort of, you know, that Tipperary region. I knew that it was a place down there, but I just didn't know where. And I know people had found it prior to me and had fished it prior to me, but nobody had ever really had access to it. They'd all done it jumping a wall. So I wrote an article and I said, I'm on a hunt for this water. My sort of exit of the article was, I'm on this hunt for this water down somewhere down the southern parts of Ireland. It's on an estate, and I'm looking for it, and I'm not going to rest until I find it, because I believe there could be carp in there to £40. About 3 or 4 weeks later, got a phone call from a guy called David Overy. David Overy was, he passed away a number of years ago from cancer. And he was the nice, I've met a lot of nice guys in my fishing. A lot of some real bad ones, but the nice ones really stay in your mind. And David was a mad pike angler. And David rang me, he says, will you meet me for a coffee in town? He worked in insurance, Hibernian, I think it was at the time. And I said, yeah, what's up? He says, I think I may know where your lake is. I said, fair enough. Can we go now? So I met him for a coffee, and he sat down with me and he said, now, I have to put this into context. David Overy was a pike angler through and through. That was his mantra. And he was bloody good at it. And he had pike to 36 pounder. He had multiple 30s back in times when they were like, you know, hen's teeth. Yeah. And we sat having this coffee, and he said, I know where it is. It's in Kilsheelan. And he said, I think I can get you in there. She lets me fish whenever I want. And he said, now, back in the day, he said, I used to fish, like a couple of years ago, he said, I used to fish down there, and there were no small carp in there, they were just big ones. And he said, I was sitting there on a very hot sunny day, flat calm, and he said, a carp swam by me, and he said, it was the size of a Guinness keg. He said it was wide and long.
So you're drooling at this stage, because not only have you found the lake, but now you're getting to know that what the stock is.
Well, no, he never caught it.
Yeah, but he's seen it.
He'd seen it. And what he told me then was, he said, you know, that was a couple of years previous. And then, you know, my last time there, the place was overrun with small carp. I've never seen them before in there. And he said, and I took a load of them with me. And he put them into lakes in Waterford for live baiting for pike. Can't say that out loud, but that's what he was doing. And he let them go. Right. What he didn't use was just let it go. And he was using carp as live bait. I want to cry. Anyway, so look, he put me onto the estate. He gave me the address and said, look, see how you go. And so this would have been early 90s. I'm really bad at remembering dates and figures and facts, so some of it's going to get skewed, right? But it was early 90s. And I sent a letter, and I got a Dear John letter back, thanks, but no thanks. It was like, not interested. So I sent a letter a month for 12 months. Every month went out, and it was offering just a little bit more. If I get a syndicate put on your lake, these measures are due to control it. This is what we do. Nothing. Not even a reply. Then one day I got a letter through the post, and Liam Hayes, who was the farm manager, had just started there, had, according to him, he was sifting through some of the rubbish letters and stuff. And he came across one of my letters, and he went to Jessica, who owned the place. What's this? There's money here. Why are we not doing this? And believe it or not, when Decoy got up and running, it actually became per acre the most profitable piece of land they owned on the whole farm, and they were dealing with big cows and big horses, and
per acre, like
per acre, it was the most profitable turnover of the estate. Right. But anyway, I got invited down to a meeting, and I took Greg Matthews with me, good time angler, fishing friend, and he's more of an all-rounder. You know, he does everything, sea, game, pike, you name it, he does everything. But, you know, I kind of pulled him into the dark side of carp fishing, and he was kind of there. So we went down, we had a meeting, and they said, bring your gear with you and you can stay the weekend and fish it and see how you... And this was in October. It was cold, it was frosty, and we managed to catch fish up to 15 or 16 pound.
Right.
No big ones, but, you know, they were there. So then they got in the fisheries board to do a test fish and test net. And they came back with like, oh my God, this place is overrun with carp. This is, go for it, you know? And so after a lot of negotiations, we officially set up the first ever syndicated fishery in the country for any species, let alone carp. But it was the first carp fishery ever set up. And I ran it solidly for 10 years. And we had, I think it was 25 members in total, and that was it.
Right.
And everybody wanted in. And it was just some of the best fishing. The fishery was overrun. And so we had to get the fishery board to come in, and they started fiking it. These fike nets are long. They look like keep nets, but they're huge, long things, and they put bait in them and fish go in and don't get back out. And on the first weekend of them fiking, their first lift of the net produced 20,000 carp.
Jeez.
20,000. All slightly longer than my hand.
So what size was the decoy? It was around 10 acres,
It's a 10-acre lake with about an acre island, so it's probably 9 acres of water, but it's a 10-acre lake. Right. Average depth is about 4.5, 5 foot. Right. It doesn't go any deeper than that.
You're getting 10,000 carp on the first lift?
Well, 20,000 on the first lift.
Right.
And every other lift was 10,000, 5,000, 10,000. And they just started selling fish everywhere. And they did it with... the fishery board were taking them as well to stock their lakes and do what they wanted to do, and so it was a gold mine for the estate. It really was. And we started up the syndicate, and we had a very successful 10 years. We had a problem with the carp because it was so overrun with fish that they were covered up in argillus, and we didn't know how to treat the lake or fix it. We'd already started the carp site at that stage, and basically we just wanted to promote carp fishing in Ireland to Irish people, not really to the UK anglers, because they had their own thing. But we got very, due to the carp site, we got very friendly with big names over there. We got friendly with Tim Paisley, who flew over a couple of times and did, you know, NICAS do, the Northern Ireland Carp site, do an AGM. And it's all just, you know, going through ledgers, ticking off what's been done, where money's been spent. We didn't do any of that. We did talks, slideshows, you know, and everybody got up. We had Ray Dale Smith from Carp or Us coming over talking about rigs and stuff, Tim Paisley on bait. We had, I mean, I did a number of talks myself at the time, especially at the beginning, because we just didn't have the clout to bring anyone over. Bill Cotton from Nutrabaits came over back in the day, you know, and that's, by the way, that's how I started my journey. I started off when he came over, started using a bit of Nutrabaits. Now I flitted from Nutrabaits to solar because I'd always been using Hutchie gear prior to that. And then Hutchie began to change. Hutchie had moved away from the company. His son-in-law had taken over, and quality wasn't there. A lot of the stuff wasn't as good as it used to be. So I started looking for stuff elsewhere, and I moved through. I mean, I got sponsored by Solar and Hutchie, and you know, and I moved around because and proper order too, because every carp angler needs to find their holy grail of carp bait or carp rigs or carp hooks. You know, we all like to move around stuff until we get it right, and then you tend to stick with what you know is good. So the carp site was up and running, and we'd met Tim Paisley, and Tim Paisley had taken a shine to myself and Mark Kelly, who was helping us run the carp site, and he had invited us away to France to fish with him on a lake, and we'd met Simon Horton, who was an English guy living in France who was a fishery manager. He's he does have credentials after his name. I don't know what he does. I know it's he's a fishery biologist, whatever. Yeah. I don't know his exact title, but Simon was a really nice guy. We hit off really well with him. And I rang him up when we saw this Argillus problem really beginning to affect the fish. I rang him up and said, can you fix the problem? And how do we do it? So he said, well, first of all, the estate needs to hire me. I mean, he was in business, so he wanted money. But he said, if the estate hires me to fly over, I'll do a full assessment on the lake. And then what we'll do is we'll take it from there. So he flew over. And one of the problems, we were catching, well, I didn't know it was a problem at the time, but we were catching these commons that looked nearly see-through. And they were just odd looking. They looked more like a ballon wrasse than an actual common carp. And we called them mauve commons. In fact, Simon actually called them mauve commons, and that's where we adopted the term from. And he said that it was a genetic retardation of overbreeding within this lake. Yeah. Now, I'm going to go back on this for a second because I think this is important. Trying to find out where these fish in decoy came from, they predated any other carp in Ireland. Now, Bill Brazier, who from Cork, and look, I'm not knocking Bill's. Bill did he's a scientist, he's a fishery biologist. Again, I don't know his exact title, and he did a whole thesis on the history of carp in Ireland. That was what he did to get his degree. He says that the carp in decoy were from an Irish stocking elsewhere. I vehemently disagree with him. And I've had words with him on it, and he says I'm wrong, I say he's wrong. We're never going to win it. But we had an actual letter which indicated that he did a tour of Europe, and he brought back two things, shrubs and carp. So we believe they came from somewhere in Europe, and they were a different strain. They looked different to any of the Irish strains that we'd been fishing, whether it be the Loch or Gamorstown. They looked different in their shape and whatever. The way he did it was he used to go down and catch the carp out the lake because they didn't naturally spawn in that lake. And there was another pond up by the castle in the estate, and he used to put them in there, and they spawned successfully in there. So once they spawned, he'd take the whole lot back out and put them down in the lake, and he kept them going for all those years. Right. If you remember, I was saying about these Guinness keg-sized carp. Yeah. When we started catching the fish there initially, they had massive heads, super long bodies, and huge tails. And if they had meat on them, they were all 30-pounders all day long. Now, here's and I know I'm jumping around the place a bit here, but an interesting side note is there was a guy, and I don't know his name, Costner was his surname, but the Southern Fisheries Board showed me the record of it. They attended the weighing of it. And this guy was an English guy who had permission from the estate to fish the lake. And in one day, he had a 230-pound carp. This is in 1975. He had a 230, one was a mid-30, one was a 31, and one was 35 plus, one was 31, and one was 27. And the Southern Region Fishery Board officers came out and weighed and officiated them. But the estate wouldn't allow them claim as the Irish record, because that would have, back then, beaten the English record in 1975. And Costa, wasn't Costner, it was Costa. Tom Costa, that's the name. I told you I'm really bad at names, but I read the report, and that was officially recorded and weighed with witnesses and everything. It was the Irish record, but the estate at the time wouldn't allow them because they didn't want people coming in en masse trying to fish the place. Yeah. So that was the history of decoy and its fish. I don't know what I was saying after that. So we're back now to Simon Horton. Simon came over, and the reason why we had this retardation is because the fish were just spawning with each other and had broken it down to such a level. And he said, look, I can fix your Argillus. And I'll tell you how he did it.
What is Argillus, though?
Argillus is a little parasite, and they are a contact-to-contact parasite, as all parasites are. But when fish are in such big numbers, and are closely shoaling, these parasites can lay eggs and then just jump to each other from fish to fish, and they cover the body. You could have 30, up to 100.
They look a little leech or something?
What they look like is like a little horseshoe crab. They're clear with a greeny tinge, but they irritate the skin of the carp and can cause fatalities eventually. And they tend to proliferate around the gill area, which is a problem. Simon had a way of treating it, which he did in France, and he used this particular ingredients that was not strictly legal. And this is going to show you back in the 90s how crazy things were. He took a Ryanair flight with 2 lemonade bottles taped with a purple liquid in them in his hand luggage and walked straight through customs. Nobody stopped him. Nobody checked him. Went, sorry, liquids? What's this? Yeah. These were big bottles full of this liquid. And he brought in his bag a spraying suit, and he said, when this happens, it kills off everything, bloodworm, any sort of life in the lake, and you have to artificially feed it for 6 weeks, and then it'll all come back to life. All the argillus will be gone. And what happened was he was able to spray it, and as he sprayed across the lake, as he was out in the boat doing it in lines, as he sprayed, it's an irritant, and the fish didn't like it, and they all were just literally straight out of the water, so you could actually see what stock you had. Right. And he was able to deduce roughly the biomass. Obviously, it was just a conservative figure given. And he was saying, you've too many fish in there. You're going to have a massive fish kill. And also, you're going to find a fish kill's coming, whether it be this week, next year, or the next 2 years. But he said, within 5 years, you're going to lose most of your fish will be gone. Because they're genetically poor, and they also are too many. So that's kind of where I'm going to park it on Decoy. We had officially established the best looking fishery in the country. I still haven't found a lake like it for just beauty. Just the most amazing place. And I spent years sitting down at meetings with the estate management saying, you're making a fortune out of this lake, please invest some money back into it and put an otter fence on it. Lake's been there 120 years, 130 years. Why do we need an otter fence? Well, the river's literally 100 yards away, the River Suir. And it's gonna get us one of these days, and they wouldn't do it. So anyway, moving on then, I got a phone call. This is where we're going to get to where this is your area. Yeah. Maynooth. I got a phone call from a guy called Grant. Can't remember his last name. He was the fishery manager there was only one lake there. It was the Trout Lake. And he rang me up and he says, I've been told by the Fisheries Board that you're the man to talk about everything carp, and would you meet me up at the thing? We want to maybe dig a new lake, and we want it to be a carp lake. So I went up, I looked around, he brought me around the field, which was prior to the lake. And he said, could this make a carp fishery? And I was like, yeah, it could. It's big enough. And he said, could you map out a lake, design it? We do an aerial picture of it, and then you map it out. So I designed the lake. And he said, right, well, we've got to go ahead. We've got the funding. We're going to dig a lake, and we're going to make a carp lake. And can you organise stock? I had a word with Decoy, and they were quite happy, because their attitude was, we're giving you the small stuff. And the more guys that learn to carp fish will want to come down and pay and be part of our syndicate eventually. So this is all good for us. So we were digging a carp lake, and I went up he called me, he says, Doug, yeah, come up before it gets filled. And I looked at it and I went, my map was the average depth was 10 foot. Looks about 2.5 foot. No, it's 10 foot deep. When that water's in, that'll be 10 foot. We've done all the measurements. Sure. Don't think so, mate. Now, you fished it, and it's not 10 foot deep.
No.
Somewhere along the lines, whether they were just trying to save money or... I'm not going to go into what happened there, but he left shortly after. But we didn't get our 10 foot or anything close. And, it was resembling what I envisaged, but some parts I didn't like, but he wasn't going to fix. And so Maynooth was born. We got some carp, we put them in, they started to grow. A couple of local lads set up a little group on it, and it didn't really take off though. They had water leaking out everywhere. They had big problems with,
They divided it off with a net, which was strange.
Yeah, they put literally and made half of it a trout lake and half of it a carp lake. It made no sense whatsoever. But eventually Grant left and Julie took over, and she rang me up and she said, we need to fix all these problems, and, you know, what can we do to make it better? And I said, well, you need bigger carp, and the only way you can do that is to import them. So she said, well, look, come out for a meeting and we'll work this out. So at this stage, I was still running Decoy. I'm a family man. I've only got limited time, and I really didn't want to take on another project. And they sat me down and they said, look, what can you offer us? And I said, well, what's in it for me? Because I'm happy with what I'm doing. Yeah. And so if I take this on, there has to be a remuneration in this. And a figure was agreed that they were comfortable paying and I was comfortable receiving. It was small stuff. You know, if I was doing it all again, it would be in the multiples. But, and what we agreed with was that I would provide the contacts for the fish, and that was going to be through Simon Horton in France. Yeah. And they would set up a decent carp fishery. They were getting in pumps that were going to pump in the water better, which they did. They kept the levels, and all of a sudden the lake started to look like it could be a carp fishery. I can't remember at that stage whether they had an otter fence, and I don't think they did.
They didn't at the start.
No.
That was 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
Around that time, when I started fishing it, there was no otter fence at the...
So anyway, I talked to Simon over in France, and Simon said, yeah, Monsieur Bigot, who was the fishery owner in France, that's what they did. They reared fish and sold them on. He said, yeah, we can do this. We can bring them. So I went to the fisheries board, and they put me onto a person, and I'm not going to name names here, in the Institute of the Marine Department of Marine Institute. So this person was the top honcho of imports. Yeah. And she said, under European law, you're allowed to bring these in. So you can do this. But we have to have X, Y, and Z done for them to come. So now, Decoy, their ears pricked up now because they heard that Maynooth was going to get big fish. Now, that didn't sit well with them. And Simon had already said, what you need is you need to, there's a word for it, it's evading me at the moment, but you've basically got to add new stock into your lake to get a better gene pool. And to, and Simon said, this is the Amazon Indian thing going on here. Chances are the fish will be as clean as a whistle going in, but your carp may likely all die that's already in the lake, because they will have never been in 100 years exposed to anything.
So you say it's like the Amazon guy, we always coming in with the common cold.
Common cold would just wipe them out. Yeah. And so we had a meeting with all the syndicate members of Decoy, and it was put to a vote. 2 people said no to fish coming in, and the other 23 fully in favour. Didn't mind, they wanted big fish. The 2 guys abstaining, it's not they didn't want the fish, but they wanted small fish brought in. They didn't want the big fish. They didn't want an automatic big fish water. And at that stage, I was getting I thought I was old then. I'm much older now. But I was like, I can't be arsed waiting for bigger fish. Let's get them in while we can, So it was decided that Decoy would receive some stocking and they would piggyback. And because Liam, the farm manager of Decoy was friendly with Julie because he was providing them fish. They were liaising with each other. I sat on the banks with Liam of Decoy and said, Liam, you know, I am being looked after to set up Maynooth. I cannot be involved with the fish being stocked into Decoy as well. It has to be 100%, you know, a separate...
kind of a conflict of interest.
Yeah, I wanted it completely separate. So if you want someone to handle the fish coming in, Greg will take over, because myself and Greg were running Decoy, co-runners. And so what happened was, you know, we got everything in motion. The lake was all set up, as I said, for the fish to arrive. I'd contacted the fishery board, and I'm not going to say who I contacted, but he was the lead scientist. And yep, that's good. As once the Department of Marine are happy with everything, contacted my contact in the Department of Marine, who was contacting Simon in France. You need to have vet certs, you need this, you need that. He did all of that. And I rang the fisheries board. The fish were then loaded in the stock ponds ready. They were being drained. I rang the Department of Marine again. Now, I was ringing this particular person, and this is, I have to say this, I had her number, mobile number, and I rang her while she was on holidays in Spain lying by the pool. And she chatted with me for 20 minutes. She said, I'm sitting in the sunshine. What do you need? And she okayed everything. She was happy with everything. Simon was happy with his end. I rang the fisheries board and said, fish are coming in at Rosslare on this date at this time. Simon put a 2.5 ton truck full of fish and brought them to Rosslare, straight through. No customs check, no stop. No fisheries board officers to meet us. Drove up the motorway, straight to Maynooth. Put all the fish in the lake in Maynooth. And the biggest that went in was 36 pound. And then it went down to Decoy and put 36 fish into Decoy. And unfortunately, you know, a couple of weeks later, all the fish started to go belly up in Decoy, as predicted. Now, not all of them died, but and a lot of smaller fish stayed alive. And then actually, in subsequent years, actually spawned and crossed with
the French fish,
which was exactly what we had hoped for. And my main aim with this always was, historically, Ireland had poor strained carp. We didn't have good fish. And all I wanted to do was, you know, help future propagation with different strains so that we'd get bigger fish growing. You know, like Gamelstown fish maxed out at 20 pound. They rarely go over that. Maybe one or two might when pushed, but they just were a stunted strain. So we got them up and running. Maynooth opened up, and next of all, the fisheries are being raided by the IFI and shut for illegal fish movements. And look, the fishery board didn't think we were doing this. They thought, you know, when, you know, me involved in it, you know, it was just talk, hot air, you know, and we'd done it and nobody else had done it, and we'd done it legally. But things went very, very sour. Look, I'm going to say it went tits up. They put the lakes into quarantine, were threatening to kill all the stocks of the fish, kill the lakes dead, and the blame game came, and everyone wanted to blame me. Now, I had sat with the owner of Maynooth and Julie in Maynooth and said, I'm offering you contacts, and I'll help set up the syndicate. I've dug the lake, I've done all of this, The one thing I will not be involved with, I said, the one thing I will not be doing is I will have nothing to do with the fish coming in. I will give you the contact and you'll be talking to Simon, you pay Simon yourself. And the reason why I'm doing this, because this has gone on in the UK and I'm not get anywhere down the line being accused of this. It was called gazumping on fish stocks. So basically what it was say you were buying carp and I'd say, well, look, I know a guy, And I'm telling you it's 12 quid a pound of fish, and he's only charging 6 quid a pound, and I'm taking the money off you and giving it to him, and I'm skimming off it.
Yeah.
I didn't want that accusation to ever come to me. So I said, nothing to do with me. Decoy, this has nothing to do with me. You can deal with Julie and Simon and all the rest. You know Simon, you deal with them, nothing to do with me. So when the lakes got shut, quarantined, everyone wanted to blame me. And I was blacklisted, blackballed. I was threatened. I was told that they were coming for my house, take it off me, because they were going to sue me for so much money. And basically, nobody stood by me on any level. Even people I thought who were friends in the fishing game just kind of, not going there, he's toxic. And look, a lot is talked about mental health these days, but my mental health really suffered back then. And I struggled with it all. And a deal was finally struck, but there was a meeting with the scientist from the Fisheries Board. He said his name. The Fisheries Board asked how could they prosecute me.
Okay.
And the DPP were there present and laughed and said, how can you prosecute someone who has nothing to do with it? He's not got his name on anything. He's not signed anything. He's not paid for anything. In fact, he's not even involved in this conversation, so I don't know why we're having it. And I learned at a later date that Liam, who was the farm manager, told me out straight that Jessica, trying to appease the Fisheries Board, said, I have an idea of if you want to get to him, I can ban him from life from Decoy. It's his baby, it's his life. And I can give him a lifetime ban, it will kill him. And they all agreed that that would be the best way forward. And I received a lifetime ban from Decoy.
From the lake that you'd
on a lake that I set up, made them a fortune on. And that was the payoff. Just so that they could get the heat off themselves, they were willing to throw me under the bus. And it destroyed me. And, you know, it left such a bad taste in my mouth that for 4 years I didn't go fishing. I stopped fishing completely. I went fly fishing and really enjoyed it, actually. It was good fun.
See, from someone else from that point of view, now I was only a young lad, I was only 18, 19 at the time, literally starting out in carp fishing. And I joined Maynooth, and I was fishing Maynooth when the lake was fully just dug, and we had the net across the thing, and half of it was trout, and you were catching trout more than you were carp and anything like that. We didn't hear any of this. No. The new fish came in, and you're told, listen, the new syndicate is going to be set up. It's 400 quid for the year, I think it was at the time. If you want to be a member, because you were fishing here originally, because I'd been fishing it for like a few months before that when the lake is up, you can become a member. We're getting all these new fish in. Then I think we fished it for one night.
And then it was shut.
Fish, and then it got shut.
Yeah.
And then it was like, I think it was 6 months or whatever it was before we got to fishing again.
It was a long time in quarantine. Yeah. But it was all worked out. And once
But we didn't hear anything like about all the stuff that was happening to you. And then when I subsequently heard and read stuff and like that, and I went, Jesus Christ, I didn't even know all that shit was going on. Do you know what I mean? Like, and that's the...
Look, you know, I'm not being funny. I was being rung and told that from people who were on Decoy that they were going to shoot me, that they were going to come up to my house, pull me out the house and beat me to within an inch of my life, that the next time that the knife in the back would actually be a real one. And these were people that up to that point were kissing my ass every time they saw me.
It's fishing.
I know, it's a hobby.
Day, do you know what I mean?
It's a hobby, for fuck's sake, you know, it's not. But look, it got very nasty. And then everything settled out. The Fisheries Board did tests. They realised the fish were clean. And they realised they legally couldn't kill the fish because as much as they bleated it that it was an illegal fish movement, it wasn't illegal. In 2004, they held the National Carp Conference. The Fisheries Board set it up, and it was held up in Mullingar. I didn't go to it, and I didn't go to it on purpose because it was just too raw for me. The Department of Marine stood up there and announced to the whole convention of every carp angler had travelled from every part of the country because they wanted to hear what was going on, that under the 2004 legislation, that this was an illegal fish movement into these two lakes. Fish were stopped in 2003. The Department of Marine tried to retrospect the law, which you can't do. It wasn't an illegal movement. And on talking, I met a fishery board officer, somebody I knew, up at Maynooth, and he was doing a lift of the tank. They had a netting in with small fish because you couldn't just keep culling big fish. And he said to me, the reason why they said it was illegal was Simon's veterinary certs were in French. He says, and under EU law, that's up to us to translate them. But they said that because they were in French, they couldn't understand it. That was an illegal move. And it wasn't. So there was this whole thing of, the blame game, and then all of a sudden once the lakes opened and everyone was catching big fish. Best thing ever. Gerry was still a shitbag, but great fishing, and decoy, Maynooth got hit by otters. They then fenced it. The 36 that went in died, but there was some big fish in there still. And there were a lot of fish, and they had a few ingresses of otters over the years, and things happened, and they weaned down the stock of fish so there wasn't that many. But, originally there were 325 carp in that lake, all of them 20s and 30s, just savage. And what I really wanted out of that was that, if anything spawned, that they would be allowed to be removed and stocked elsewhere around the country, and we could then get these fish moving. They'd grow. They're French fish, different genetics. They're going to be bigger. And look, it just wasn't to be, because I'm going to say it out loud, and, egos of a lot of the carp anglers around the southern part of Ireland were just so off the scale that they just were willing to screw over their grandmother to suit themselves. It was just shocking to see it in play. As I said, I didn't fish for 4 years, and then when I came back, got a phone call from Liam, and he invited me down to decoy, and he said, the ban's been lifted off you. You're welcome, free fishing whenever you want to come down, you fish it whenever you want. You don't even have to. And I was grateful, and I fished it for one season, and I managed to catch a large portion of the fish that were in there. Because there were only 35 fish left, and maybe some small sprats from the original fish. And what actually happened to me was, one of the days I was driving down the alleyway to get to the lake decoy. I was only just turning up after a 3-hour drive, and Jessica was on the road, and I saw red, and I went on that. I had it out with her, and I told her what I thought of what she did, and she brushed under the carpet and went, "Oh, Jer, what are you on about? That's all water under the bridge." I said, "But I had built up a name within the Fishers Board. I built up a name in angling. I was writing for magazines. I was a known carp angler. I never looked for fame and fortune, but I always wanted to promote carping, and it's all I ever wanted to do. And unfortunately, to do so, you have to gain some notoriety, and that brings baggage." I said, in a single blow, you blew how many years I've been here, all that hard work I've put in, and meetings with Fishers Board, and trying to set stuff up and trying to get things in motion, and you blew it on me in literally one day. And I won't tell you what I called her. I got back in my car, and I turned and I went home, and I never went back to decoy. That was my last ever time on decoy. I couldn't go back. I just had so much pent up hatred for what was done on me, because, as I said, I wasn't involved in the very part that went wrong. And I wasn't involved because I knew it had the potential to go wrong. And that's why I kept myself out of it. And then to be banned out of a lake that I wasn't even involved in stocking, decoy, which I'd already gone, I'm not involved in this. Maynooth had some recourse on me. They didn't pay me any money, and, anything that was paid was returned, and, it just, and I stepped away. And eventually then Julie turned round, who was running the place, and she said, yeah, whenever you want to come up fish, forget, now that all the dust has settled, everyone's catching fish. So this was a couple of years later, I started fishing it, and I fished it for a while. But to be honest with you, I never really liked Maynooth.
And where were you fishing, like, when you weren't doing Maynooth, you weren't doing things like that? Was there anywhere?
I went down, I discovered another lake that had been stocked, and I got word of, and nobody was fishing it for carp. And I started fishing it. And I was working with Main Irish Angling with Derek. Derek Talbot was the owner of the shop. And, we were fishing together a lot. We were doing a bit on the loch. And I'll tell you where it is. It's Massloch in Abbey Leaks. And it's kind of the sister lake to Gills Pond. Gills Pond's a match lake, has carp in it, but this had Tony Campbell fish that had been brought in from the UK legally. Tony Campbell's the only fishery that we can in Ireland. We're a AAA rated country, and it's the only AAA rated farm in the UK. And so that's why we can't import from France, Germany, Belgium, or anywhere else. Yep. They don't have the AAA rating. Now, technically, we could call bullshit on the AAA rating because we have had SVC, we've had koi herpes, we've had other outbreaks of disease in this country, and other things in other fish that technically should have been called out on our AAA rating. But somehow things just, you know how it works. Yeah. I'm not going to get into it, but, so this particular lake, Massloch, is a 3.5 acre lake. And it's the closest looking lake I've ever seen to looking like Decoy. It's beautiful. And I was fishing down there and I was loving it. And the fish were, like here, dark, black, scaly, big mirrors, big commons. We were catching fish up to, I think the lake record's 22 pound. I think Mark Kelly has that. But, there was potential. If managed right. But lovely lake. And, a few of the lads that were my gang that I hang around with are still members and still fishing and I'm still catching and still loving it. Yeah. And then I moved up here to Loch Gull and I started fishing Loch Gull for 2 seasons. And I met Darren Riley on Loch Gull and he, come on, Jez, let's have you over in NICAS. I was like, I wasn't prepared to make the jump to NICAS. And then Colin, my fishing pal up here, and I've been fishing since Gamallstown days with Colin. 25 years, we've probably known each other 30 years at this stage. And he's a very close friend of mine and I love him to bits. And Colin said, by the way, he says, you're a member of NICAS. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I paid for your membership. You can just pay me back when you're ready. I was like, you absolute bellend. Nice. I wasn't ready for that. Yeah. And he just laughed and he went, well, I knew you wouldn't, so I had to shove you, give you a bit of a push. And so I was in, paid him the money back eventually, delayed it a bit just to annoy him. And I started fishing. And I have to be honest with you, this is my 3rd or 4th season up it. I don't know what it is. But I don't want to be anywhere else. In general, for such a big club and that, most of the guys are really lovely. Now, don't get me wrong. There's 1 or 2 that...
Well, kind of in general, it's good up here, you're finding anyway. You're liking it.
I like how you segued that to a more positive note, because this place is awesome. I've made some really good pals up here now. And I fished quite a bit with Darren and Marty, and I just love being on the bank with them. They're just so positive. I love positive people. Yeah. And they're bloody good anglers as well. Yeah. And the great thing is they share the same mindset. Is they're an open book. I believe I'm an open book because people have always given out to me that, why are you telling them all your secrets? Why are you showing them that stuff? Why are you giving them that? I'd hand stuff to people. Try this, try that. And I just want to help people. That's what I always wanted to do in the beginning. I never did it for the glory or the fame because there is no glory in fame. Yeah. And you're an arsehole if you think there is. Yeah. This game is it's a hobby. It's only fishing. We ain't doing anything brilliant. And it's all been done before by better people. So, you're just you're just trying to leave a positive legacy. That, look, none of us know what we've got left. I had a chat with Rob there last year, and it really made me kind of wobble a bit, because we were saying, you know, like, I'm 54 this year, and Rob was 60 last year, 61 this year. And I'd said to him, how much more have you got left in this fishing malarkey? Because let's face it, you know what we carry is. Yeah. And, you know, the amount of gear, the camera gear alone with what I do, and I know you're exactly the same as me, it's a lot of gear. It's a lot of effort. You know, driving for hours and then setting up in the rain and then packing everything down. And Rob says to me, I can't see myself doing this beyond 65, 66. I'm thinking, shit, he's only got 5 or 6 seasons in him left. That ain't much. Yeah. And then I went, well, that's me. I've only got maybe 12, 13 seasons left in me. That ain't much. Because let's face it, the years go by fast the older you get. And it's the first time I've actually thought about my own mortality and what legacy I'll leave behind me of what I've achieved in my fishing journey. It probably doesn't matter much, you know, in the scheme of things. But I can hold my hand up and say, I've caught some big fish, both here and abroad. I've been consistent. I've gone to pretty much every water that I could and done very well on each water, which not every angler can do. And I'm not blowing smoke up my own arse now. I'm just saying, for my legacy is, but I did start what grew our sport in carp fishing to where it is now. Because without me starting Decoy and helping pioneer Ballan Colleague, which was probably the start of where I wanted, that's probably the start where it really kicked off the desire for a syndicate. And then getting Decoy up and running and then starting Maynooth and completing Maynooth. And then on the back of that, other people watched what I'd done and started to do it. You know, like the fish only came from Decoy that established carp here in Ireland, Northern Ireland. And NICAS was born on the back of everything I'd set up. I don't know, it's not a bad legacy, I think. But I'll never get thanks for it.
But this is the opportunity just to give your side of the story and put it across.
And people think I'm being big-headed and conceited by saying all of this now. And all right, well, that's your opinion. I'm just proud. I'm more proud of what I did. And I'm proud that I fished in a period of time where it was pioneering carping. We were pioneers in carping, in Irish carping. It'd already been done in the UK, but it hadn't been done here. And we pioneered our way. And I'm not the only person, and there's been brilliant people down in Cork who are doing a lot more stuff. You know, the Sidney Kennedys, the Ernie McGraths, Tom Hillgroves, and I could list off a whole ream of guys down there. And there's Dublin guys and there's Northern guys who've all played a part in this journey. I'm just glad I was quite a big part of that journey. I think that's probably the best way to wrap this up, isn't it?
It is indeed. Jerry,
unless you've got anything else you want to talk about, but I
think we've covered the whole history of carping from the 90s, 3 decades worth of things there. But I just want to say thanks very much for coming across. I know, as I said, I wanted to give your opportunity and get it on record on film. I've seen it around the internet and stuff of what happened. As I said, I was fishing them lakes when all the stuff was going on. Knew nothing about it. I was chatting to lads during the week that I was mentioning your name, and I said, sure, he's designed Maynooth. What? And these are the guys who are fishing them lakes, fishing the fish, or the offspring of the fish that you brought in and helped bring in. Do you know what I mean? Like the legacy that is. And you talk about all about legacy. So you should be proud.
I only mentioned Nutrabaits once.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Not bad at all. Listen, thanks very much.
Cheers, mate.
Much appreciated.
No worries.